Hey everyone, let's dive right into today's explainer. We're breaking down a really tragic event that recently unfolded right off the coast of Massachusetts. We're going to look closely at the timeline of the Norwegian Breakaway Overboard incident, and maybe more importantly, we're zooming out to examine the broader industry context around these kinds of maritime emergencies. It's a somber topic, absolutely, but understanding the protocols, the logistics, and the historical data, that's totally crucial if we want to truly grasp how the modern maritime travel industry operates when the unthinkable actually happens.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the incident itself. Second, the search and rescue operations. Third, we'll get the view from onboard the ship. And finally, we'll wrap up with that broader industry context.
All right, let's kick things off with part one, Man Overboard, the incident. Picture this, it's late on the evening of April 25, 2026. The massive Norwegian Breakaway is nearing the tail end of a 7-night voyage, cruising from Bermuda up to Boston. But as the ship was off the coast of Cape Cod, specifically about 12 miles east of Wellfleet, Massachusetts, a crew member went overboard, right into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, a crucial detail for the investigation here is that this wasn't just some rumor or a delayed realization. The fall was actually confirmed by the ship's own security cameras, so that instantly turned this into an active, verifiable emergency. Let's walk through the timeline, because it shows exactly how fast things escalate. Late evening, the fall happens, and it's caught on those cameras. Fast forward a bit to 11:55 p.m., and ship tracking data shows the vessel abruptly changing course to start its search. Just over an hour later, at 1:19 a.m., a Coast Guard MH-60 helicopter arrives on the scene. And then, tragically, after this massive overnight and morning effort, the Coast Guard had to suspend their search at 12:25 p.m. the next day, pending any new info. It literally illustrates a rapid, almost immediate escalation from the moment the incident was recorded to the deployment of major rescue assets.
Which naturally brings us to Part 2, Search and Rescue Operations.
So what exactly happens when a man overboard incident occurs? Well, a ship doesn't just call for help and sit around waiting. There is an immediate, heavily structured protocol. Think of that like the anatomy of a rescue operation. Step 1, the huge cruise ship has to immediately halt its trajectory and turn back to the person's last known position. Step 2, the crew deploys a dedicated rescue boat and life rings into the water in a really desperate attempt to locate the individual. And Step 3, they initiate a highly coordinated search with the authorities. In this specific case, the cruise line instantly contacted the U.S. Coast Guard Marine Rescue Coordination Center to get that wider search grid going. And I have to say, the Coast Guard's response was incredibly robust. They immediately sent out an MH-60 helicopter for overhead illumination. Remember, it's pitch black out there. Later on, they brought in an HC-144 airplane to take over the aerial search during the daylight hours, and they even deployed a surface crew from Coast Guard Station Provincetown. We're talking about a massive, multi-agency response here. The ship itself stayed actively engaged in this search for about 4 hours before the Coast Guard officially took over the whole operation, releasing the Norwegian Breakaway so it could safely continue its voyage to Boston.
Now let's shift gears a bit and look at Part 3, the view from onboard.
To really ground this story in the human reality of that exact moment, listen to what passenger Rebecca Durandisi from Needham, Massachusetts had to say. She recalled a night like this. I was drifting off to sleep when I noticed a light go on that woke me up, and then I heard some loud noises. Just imagine that eerie, kind of unsettling reality, right? You're on vacation, comfortably asleep in your room, and suddenly the ship is making these sharp maneuvers. Massive searchlights are cutting right through the dark ocean, and lifeboats are being lowered. It's a stark reminder of just how isolated you really are when you're out at sea.
But the passengers weren't just left totally in the dark about what was happening. Overnight, they were actually formally alerted to the emergency through a ship-wide man overboard announcement. And later, as they finally pulled into Boston, they received an explanatory letter from the cruise line. It basically stated that the ship had remained engaged in search and rescue efforts, which required the vessel's full attention. It was a clear, respectful way for the cruise line to communicate the sheer severity of the situation and explain why this massive ship had been effectively stopped in the ocean for 4 critical hours.
And as you might guess, stopping a commercial vessel of that size for 4 hours creates some major logistical ripple effects for the whole port. Originally, the Breakaway was scheduled for an early Sunday morning arrival in Boston to offload and get ready for the next round of guests. Instead, because of the search efforts, the ship actually ended up docking at Boston's Black Falcon terminal shortly before noon on Sunday. Naturally, that delayed turnaround completely pushed back the embarkation for the thousands of new passengers who were waiting to start their own cruise that afternoon.
All right, that brings us to our final section, Part 4, the broader industry context.
Whenever something tragic like this happens, I think we have to zoom out and ask, is this just some crazy, isolated anomaly, or is it a known variable in the industry? Well, unfortunately, it's not entirely isolated. This specific incident on the Norwegian Breakaway follows just weeks after another Norwegian Cruise Line crew member was lost at sea from the Norwegian Viva down near Costa Maya, Mexico. Having that context shows us that while these tragedies are definitely rare, especially given the millions of people who cruise safely every single year, there's still a very real, ongoing issue that the maritime industry is constantly grappling with.
And to truly anchor us in the historical reality of this topic, I want you to consider this really striking number: 400 plus.
That number represents the total recorded overboard incidents from cruise ships since the year 2000. This is based on some really extensive data compiled by a cruise industry researcher named Dr. Ross Klein. Over 400 people. And crucially, Dr. Klein's data includes both passengers and crew members. These incidents are happening several times each year across the global fleet. So it's a known, tragic variable in modern maritime travel, one that absolutely demands constant procedural and technological evolution.
So what exactly is the industry doing about it from a regulatory standpoint? Well, that brings us to the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act. This is a super crucial federal mandate that literally requires cruise ships to use technology capable of capturing images or detecting people who fall overboard, wherever those systems are available. This act is the exact reason why the Norwegian Breakaway had the security camera footage necessary to immediately confirm the crew members' fall in the first place. Today, maritime investigations rely heavily on this mandated footage to establish accurate timelines and direct those initial rescue efforts we talked about.
Which really leaves us with this final, incredibly important question. With advanced tracking technology clearly available and literally mandated by law, how can the cruise industry actually prevent the next overboard tragedy? We know these ships can capture the images, and we know the crews can launch massive, highly coordinated rescue operations in the middle of the night. But the gap between detecting a fall and actually preventing one, that remains a really profound challenge for the entire industry. I hope this explainer gave you a clear, factual understanding of how these critical maritime incidents unfold and the complex data behind them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the systems that surround us.